Hello and welcome to this week's episode of ShatterCast. Is it week? Should I say week during this? Are we still?
It's a special edition.
This episode
whatever.
of ShatterCast. This special episode of ShatterCast. We're keeping all of those. That was a beautiful introduction. My name is John. I'm your host. I am joined by my good friend and wife, Hannah, and also Derek Whitmore. And Derek, we have a guest today. Brandon, why don't you do the honors of introducing our guest?
Sure. We're super excited to have Brandon Vieira here. He's a good friend of mine. I met him just playing games at one of our local gaming stores, and we brought him on because it's a special edition. Before we get to that, just a quick word of caution, just a little trigger warning. We're talking about some serious issues today. We think it's very important, but we're talking about anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. So we know that could be triggers for some people, so we just want to make you aware. So hopefully you're watching this in a time where you're in a good space, but we do think this is an important conversation to have. And so as a team, whenever we're talking about these issues, we want to also bring in experts when we can. So Brandon's a good friend of mine. He's also a counselor. I'll let him tell you a little bit about his background, but we thought it would be important for him to be here while we're talking about these important things. So Brandon, tell the world about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Derek. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I've graduated with my master's degree from our own University of Central Florida back in 2013 now. And after that, you've got to be in the field for a couple of years, pass a test similar to the bar exam that lawyers have to take, but all about diagnosing and treatment. And have 1,500 hours with clients after grad school and 1,000 in grad school. So a lot of hours with clients just to get licensed. Since I graduated, I've been in private practice for, I guess that's 7 years now. And I've worked in various agency settings. I've worked with homeless veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder pretty extensively. I've worked with addictions. I've worked with kids who are having a hard time adjusting to new environments, people who can't afford private practice counseling in a pro bono fashion. I've worked with kids who are on the verge of getting expelled from school. And I've worked with people who are struggling with anxiety and depression a fair amount. I also teach psychology at Full Sail University for the past 4.5 years or so now. And that's more than enough about me. Oh, I should mention, I love all the stuff that this podcast does. All the geeky stuff, I'm a huge fan of. I always tell my students at the start of every month that I'm very proud of my nerdiness, and they can be too. So like the poster behind Derek is incredibly cool, the picture. So
awesome. You are in the right place for geekiness. So, but yeah, that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring Brandon on. He understands our audience, our community, and a lot of people who happen to be artists or in the geek culture also deal a lot with all the topics we're talking about. So we thought Brandon would be great to join us here. So yeah, we just wanted to launch this topic. We've been talking about doing this for a while. We are in the midst of the virus pandemic. So a lot of people are dealing with a lot of anxiety and stuff, dealing with shutdown, just concerns about health issues, loss of loved ones. So we thought this would be a good time. Also, during this time when we're recording in this past month, a famous video game streamer passed away. They believe it's due to suicide. We don't know too much about it, so we're not going to go specifically into that, but we again thought it would be a great time to just talk about this stuff again and go into that. So as we're getting ready for that, any other thoughts you guys have about kind of the importance of this topic and kind of why we wanted to launch into it?
Well, I know, speaking for myself, it is a topic that hits home. I know at least I have dealt with this in the past for an extended period of time. And so I think as a panel, when we're talking about this, we're not just going we don't want to focus too much on ourselves because it's not about me. It's not about us. But it's about the issue and it's about you guys and just wanting to be a source of hope and faith. That's what Shattered's all about. And so we're not just speaking from an outsider perspective. And so I would ask for your grace and your understanding and hearing the heart of what we're sharing. Yeah, that's all I got.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, as we dive into this, a lot of people know that anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts is an issue, but I don't think a lot of times people know how big of an issue it is. So we have a couple stats here that we wanted to share. And this is usually when I'm talking to churches or groups, I usually share some of these stats just to let them know how big of an issue this is. The issue of stats is that they're always changing. So this is the most recent that I found, but here's some eye-opening things. Across the world, about 350 million people suffer from depression. 800,000 people commit suicide every year. That averages out to be about every 40 seconds someone takes their own lives. And here in the US where we're filming, suicide is a huge issue here. It has now become the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. When I was first beginning Shattered, that was about 7 years ago. The age range was about 15 to 29. And just that span of time, it has grown on both sides. So second leading cause for people all the way down to the age of 10. So pretty huge. And the number one cause of suicide is usually untreated depression. So Brandon, maybe can you speak into that a little bit? Why do some of those stats play out? And also, what's the link between anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts? We often group those together.
Sure. Yeah. I think, one of the primary symptoms and one of the ones that we all know about of depression is hopelessness. So when you feel totally hopeless, sometimes it feels like it's easier to just not go on. The short-term solution or the long-term solution for a short-term problem, so to speak. Especially when the problem doesn't feel short-term. Like if you're someone who's struggling with depression, even if tomorrow morning you would wake up and start feeling better, today it usually feels like I'll never feel better. Like it's that terrible, the big sad, some people have called it. It's kind of comically like it just feels like a heavy weight and like something that's unending. So with that in mind, someone who has never struggled with depression might have a hard time relating to just the depth of that feeling, because it's not really like being sad. I think a lot of times we relate depression to sadness and people are like, oh, I'm so depressed today. And it's like, oh, if you're already saying the word today, then you're probably not really depressed unless maybe you're on, treatment for it and you're coming out of it and you're having some on and off days. But if you're really in it, the phrase I'm feeling depressed today already doesn't check out, if that makes sense. So it feels very chronic and bad, even if it's not as chronic for you, it will still feel that way. So it's a tough thing to deal with. In terms of the age range, of course, the older you get, the more likely you are to be, dying of other things. So that's half of it. And the other half of it is, teenagers and young people especially are just more likely to have continuous hormonal imbalances. And, we all see that play out in terms of like, I grew, a foot in a year when I was in middle school or high school. And we have acne, we have awkward moments, our bodies aren't making sense to us, we're gangly, we're having social issues with other students, we're angrier than we want to be, we're sadder than we want to be. All these things happen and it all feels like it's forever. It gives us some of those same feelings that depression gives us, that like everything I'm going through, whether it's anxiety, depression, this breakup, whatever it is, this is my whole life, this is my whole world, it's permanent and it's rough. And we're going through a pandemic right now and you still couldn't pay me enough money to go back to middle school instead. Middle school is a rough time. High school can be rough. Elementary school can be rough, especially toward the end of it when people are starting to get into those days. And for different people, different ages are rougher. But a lot of those things, and anytime something feels like it's forever, that's a bad sign that someone is much more likely to be contemplating suicide as like a first thing when someone's like, I'm never going to feel better. It's always going to be this way. Those kind of talks, those kind of words are kind of warnings to anyone who has a friend who's struggling with this, that person is not seeing an out by recovery.
Yeah, that's really good. And thanks for making that distinction. We all have good and bad days where we might feel sad, but kind of that ongoing presence of not being able to get out of that funk, seems like a warning sign. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. John, Hannah, did you guys have anything to add? Just maybe the link between anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, or kind of the mix of some of those stats that we just shared?
Yeah, I think for me, being a really analytical person, like stats are what I go to. Stats are the, you can show me pictures of starving kids and it breaks my heart. You can share stats with me of starving kids and it drives me to action a lot faster, right? And so When I see things like this, I mean, we talk about it being the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. And for me, I want to get rid of all of the other years and just say that this is the second leading cause of death for children who are 10 years old. Right? Like, just thinking about that by itself, ignoring 11 to 34, and just thinking like the second leading cause of death for 10-year-olds. And that is horrible and awful. And so, yeah, it breaks my heart. And at the same time, with what you were saying, Brandon, thinking about like all of the bodily changes that happen when you're growing up, and the hormonal changes during puberty and everything. And, you know, I think one of the things that people who have never experienced it, one of the things they don't realize is that it's a chemical imbalance in your brain, and you can't choose to be happy when your chemicals aren't correct. You know, you can't just choose to be joyful when your brain won't let you, physically won't let you. You know, mental illness is a physical illness because your brain is a physical organ in your body. And so you get like this stigma of this thing that people can't really see, but it's like, it's an actual physical problem. Yeah, I don't know. I got a lot of thoughts. I'll stop.
Well, I was just going to say,
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. I'm sorry.
In terms of like the stats and understanding just how big of an issue this is, for me, I'm not a really big, stats analytical person. I grew up with people in my family dealing with these issues, but it wasn't until like I got really involved in social media as a teenager and the explosion of the internet and memes and everything that I started to see, especially like the younger generations nowadays are very open about this topic, whether they're joking about it or not. And it's really shown me just like how widespread it is. Like either someone is dealing with it or they know someone who is, and it's just all over like the everyday social media that I see. And that I think is a really big thing for me to just note, like, it's not just the people that I knew growing up, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Well, and right there, I mean, the importance of just talking about it. And we went blurry. How long ago were we blurry?
I think I was blurry through the entire time I was talking.
Sorry. The importance of just talking about it, and especially from our faith backgrounds, when we're in church, there's a lot of topics, not just this one, that the church didn't address for a really long time, especially growing up. And we see the consequences of that. And when we don't talk about an issue in church, we raise a generation that doesn't know how to approach an issue from a biblical perspective. And so being able to have a conversation around this that isn't demonizing someone who is struggling with something is so important, because if you demonize people, they're not going to open up. And if they don't open up, then that anxiety that might lead to depression or vice versa can lead to those suicidal thoughts, and they never seek help. They never reach out, it's, I don't know, there's a lot to unpack there, but being part of a culture that is willing to have these conversations and be open and honest is so important.
I think that's a huge key, and I think that's a good segue into our next thing. We want to talk about just some examples, both biblical examples of maybe people who might have dealt with anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts. We don't often think of it that way. Want to share just some quick personal stories of ourselves, and then maybe even some examples from media that we can lock onto. So, John, Hannah, what's the example you guys want to tackle?
Well, I'll start with a personal example, get that out of the way so that I don't have to talk about it a bunch of times and take over the segment. So for me, growing up through middle school, I was bullied horrendously because I was super chubby, and then I got really tall. You made the joke about growing a foot in between middle school and high school. That literally happened to me between 8th grade and 9th grade. I grew 12 inches in the summer. And so my knees hated me for a while, but I also thinned out a little bit, and everyone who made fun of me now didn't make fun of me because I towered over everybody. And I started to compensate for the bullying by just trying to be like the person everyone liked. So I got into drama, but I was friends with the kids on the football team, and I was friends with the band kids and everything else. And I just tried to be the person everyone liked. I wanted to be the funny guy, the entertainer. And I still like to do those things, but I no longer derive my self-worth from those things, but I did for so long. And it got to the point where I thought that my friends only wanted me around because I made them laugh. And if I wasn't making them laugh, then, you know, they wouldn't like me anymore. They wouldn't want to hang out with me. And that just snowballed over the years as I grew up and I went to college, and then I got like jobs out in the professional world, and all of like the things that I had built up in my life in the course of like 3 months all fell apart. Like I lost my job, the church I was working at merged with another one, and I lost that job, and like just a bunch of things just kind of broke apart. And suddenly I didn't have any of those constructs in my life that were sort of making me like pretend it was okay. You know, that meme of the dog in the restaurant that's burning down going, "This is fine." Like that was me for like 6 years. And then when suddenly the roof caves in on top of you, you can't say "this is fine" anymore because you're bleeding and suffocating. And it was probably about a 2-year process of me actually going through the reality of what I was dealing with, processing it with other people. You're going to hear me say that a lot, that it is not something that I could have fixed by myself. And it is not something I could have gotten through on my own. Like I made it out because of the people that were around me in my life. And so to me, that's one of the most important things, is surrounding yourself with genuine people who care about you. Those are going to be some of the best things that we can do. And also now on the other side of that, one of the things that's really important to me is being that person, being that genuine person who is there for others. You know, we think about Psalm 23 in the valley of the shadow of death. You know, we're supposed to get through it, but I firmly believe that once I've gotten through it, I need to go back in, because there's other people that are still there, and walk with them through that, and not just stand on the other side and say, "You can do it, I believe in you," but enter into that and walk with them. So.
Thanks for sharing. Brandon, Hannah, any kind of examples come to mind? Personal stories from media, biblical examples?
This is just sort of my own personal experience with having loved ones who have dealt with this. When I was a child, as someone who was very close to me that tried to explain to me that I knew I was depressed or struggling with depression when I stopped singing, because it was someone that used to sing all the time when I was a child. And for me, like as a child, processing that, growing up, I was the kind of person that was like always singing. I still pretty much am. And someone who takes a lot of joy from that activity. And so that kind of helped my young brain sort of think, okay, so you're doing something that you're not doing something that you would normally do. Why? And it wasn't until I matured and I would have those moments where I would just have a bad day, and I wouldn't feel like singing, and it would remind me, oh, this is how someone who is struggling with this issue feels all the time. And I know that depression has its waves, its ups and downs. You have your good days, you have your bad days. But for me, just having that piece in my life as the first time someone really talked to me about this issue, just as a child, that was sort of the concept that was put in my brain of like, I don't feel like singing. And so the times when I personally didn't feel like singing, it really registered with me that people who struggle with depression or these kinds of thoughts always feel this way. And it may not click in a way for someone else who's not like me, who's always singing that way. But I think it's important to, like John said, have these conversations when you're young. Like obviously gauge the maturity of the child and stuff, but when you're talking about it from such a young age and normalizing the conversation about it, it really helps continue those conversations. If, like, say I had developed an issue with anxiety or depression, I felt like because of those kinds of conversations I had as a child with my loved one, it would have made it easier for me to maybe talk about it or put words to it. Because I feel like a lot of people who are struggling with things, whether it's these issues or not, don't have the words or can't find the words to label or have the language to talk about what they're going through and how to process it.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that too, especially the knowing that you love to do something, but not feeling the desire to engage in it is rough. It really is, and it's a hard thing to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. But knowing that, man, if I just did that, I know I would have a good time, but I literally don't care. And not knowing how to make yourself care, and not knowing how to spur yourself to just doing the thing you know you're going to love, like singing, is rough.
Brandon, can you give us a little insight into that or some other examples?
Yeah. When it comes to depression, severe trauma, major life-changing circumstances of any sort, including struggling with depression, especially when you are kind of thrust into it or suddenly realize you're there, it's really common for people to do exactly the opposite of what they would normally do if they're doing anything at all. Like one thing is, I want to stay inside and be in bed all day and not do anything. But another potential thing is, like, if you're an introvert and you're someone who normally likes to stay inside and not do much, some people actually go out more and try to be around people and do different things, which makes them highly uncomfortable. But your trauma reaction, or sometimes even anxious or depressed brain, is just like, whatever, we're going to do something. We're going to force ourselves to do something. And that something is not necessarily the thing that's the most helpful for us. For many of us, it's turning to drugs, right? Turning to some sort of substance, turning to something new that we think is going to make us feel better because we feel like we need it. We know something's wrong. We don't know how to deal with it in a healthy way. So we deal with it in a way that feels healthy. And we cover up those things. But it doesn't necessarily have to be drugs. Like, a lot of us will cover up our anxiety, our depression, our pain, and just try to get into a video game to the point that we can forget about real life. It can even be reading books or watching TV, things like that we just do to escape. And that is effective in the short term for a lot of us. If you're struggling with the most severe depression or anxiety, it probably won't be effective. But anything less than that, it can be effective in the short term, but long term, it's just, it's going to come back once we're not doing those coping mechanisms. And the more we rely on those coping mechanisms, the less they even work, sadly. So there's a real disconnect, like what you guys were getting at, that you kind of know something is helpful, but it doesn't feel like it'll help. It doesn't feel worth it to do it. It feels like too much effort. It feels like it's just, like, I don't care, I can't do it. And there, at some point, needs to come a moment of, like, not believing everything you think, which is really, really hard to do on your own. And a lot of time it takes the boost of getting medication or talking to a professional, or just doing one of those things that's way outside of your comfort zone, and that we have so many stigmas about, like, oh, if I'm on depression medication, now I've really admitted that I lose, that I can't control what I'm doing, that something is wrong with me, that kind of a thing. But if your arm is broken, most people go get a cast. So if your brain is misfiring chemically, that's not your fault. It's nothing you've done. It's not that you are a bad person, or that you do not have enough faith or anything like that. It's just what your brain is doing, which I think, John, I think you said that very well. But I think if we can get past that stigma and get to the point where we get that help, then we can start, all the rest of these things can start falling into place a lot better for us.
I think you make a great point. I love how you said not believing everything you think.
Yeah.
Very good.
Nice. We'll dive a little bit more into that in a bit. A couple more examples, just quick, and I've shared this before, personal example. Actually, the reason we started Shattered was because of students dealing with depression and low self-esteem. I was a pastor for 12 and a half years at a church, and about 5 years into my ministry there, we started dealing with a bunch of suicides in our region, in our state. Seemed like every other week a kid was taking their own life. It was just tragic. And then probably in the space of about 2 months, we had 3 people who were either connected to the church or me take their own lives personally. And it's just a devastating time to walk through that with the families, with friends. And I tell a lot of people this, it was devastating for me. Growing up, I had dealt with some depression, just because of some abuse and some other stuff I had gone through myself, and kind of brought all that back to the surface again. And for me, my coping mechanism was about to be to run away. I was going to step away from not just church, from ministry, from everything. And I remember just sitting down, just thinking, God, this is an epidemic. Somebody somewhere has got to do something about this. And that's when I really felt God say, you're right. Why don't you? And so the cool thing is reach out to a couple friends, and that's actually why we formed Shatter Studios, to kind of share hope and faith with people who were dealing with depression, suicidal thoughts, and to do it in ways that engages them. So that's why we do podcasts and comic books and all these crazy things, but also ways that can also share some hope with them, even in dark times. So again, this is part of our heart, just as a ministry, and all of our team feels really passionate about this stuff. And Brandon was talking a little bit about stigma. There is a lot of stigma around anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, and admitting that. And I think that's something we need to break down, and break down, especially within the church. A lot of people deal with this, and unfortunately, a lot of times we don't feel comfortable sharing that. And I think, just even to take a minute for a faith perspective, there's a lot of good biblical examples of people who went through a lot of stuff. I think of David in the Psalms. If you're familiar with David's story, from a shepherd to a king, and just all the stuff he went through, the Psalms he wrote a lot of Psalms and wrote a lot of literature, and just honest, God, I'm feeling horrible today. Like, where are you? What's going on? But the thing I love about Dave, he's like, I don't know why this is happening, but I'm still going to trust in you, and believe like some good can come out of this. Like about the prophet Elijah, who had this great time where calling down fire on a mountain and got this amazing thing. And then he gets one threat and he goes running. And he's hiding in the wilderness. He's like, God, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And God has to show up and minister to him. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. And I think even of Jesus just being in Gethsemane, and just the amount of stress he went through as he was looking to what he was called to do, to go to the cross. Just the Bible says he was pretty much stressed out. It was a hard time. And for me, I love that depiction of Jesus, because if Jesus went through times that were difficult, and if Jesus asked for his friends to help and pray for him, like, shouldn't we? And if Jesus was still able to go to God and share his real feelings with God, to his Father, and be like, hey, I don't want to do this, but if it's your will, I'll walk through this with you. And I think that's a great example for us, to do the same, to ask for help when we need it, to be honest with how we're feeling, to still go to God, and to do the next right thing that we can. And we've been talking about that. So we'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of the next right things we can do. But we keep talking about anxiety, we keep talking about depression, we keep throwing those words around. What's a good, Brandon, we'll start with you. What's a good working definition of anxiety and depression, so people, not so they can diagnose themselves, but so they can maybe be aware of, like, maybe this is more than just ordinary stress or something?
Sure. I think the definitions you wrote down are excellent, but I'll work some off the top of my head. Let's say, I think the best definition of depression is feelings of hopelessness and feelings of lethargy. Like, just, I don't want to do things that I would normally want to do, and I don't have a lot of hope for the future. With that, it can also, like, exhibit itself in being irritable and angry, or being much more interested in, like I said, hobbies that are the opposite of what you used to do, or things that you can just do to disconnect and to ignore your feelings for a while, things that numb you in one way or another. Usually it's drug related, but not always. It can, like I mentioned earlier. So I think people exhibiting any of those things are likely almost definitely struggling with either anxiety or depression. But if it's the lethargy and the irritability and stuff, it's probably more on the depression side. Anxiety and depression are closely related. It's hard for me to define one without talking about the other. A lot of people go straight from struggling with one to struggling with another one, or have a tendency toward one of those things. And when they start to deal with that one thing, they have a tendency toward the other one. Anxiety is more of concern about the future, and depression, and I say concern, like extraordinary concern about the future. Like, this thing that maybe other people would deal with just fine feels like death to me. Like, and in the reptilian part of our brain, that is literally the thing that's going on, is like, I'm nervous about public speaking. I have anxiety about this one thing, which is very different than clinical generalized anxiety. But for the sake of relatability for everyone, one of the most common fears is fear of public speaking, fear of being in front of a lot of people. And that feeling of like, I am anxious about this activates that same reptilian part of your brain that would go off at a zebra when a lion is chasing them. And so that part of your brain actually believes I'm going to stand up in front of a bunch of people and die. And so that same level of terror, that I'm going to die level of terror, starts activating and going through your body, and your body pumps adrenaline to your fingertips and your legs and your arms so you can move real fast. And that moves blood flow away from your brain, which means that when you do stand up in front of all those people to speak, you're not doing as good of a job as you could if you weren't anxious, which can then feed into that, oh, I didn't say this right. This came out wrong. I can't even hardly remember it. I'm still just as nervous for next time. And you can actually build on that anxiety in some cases, if it's severe enough. And that's also how you get into stage fright. Some people have that fight or flight response, and their response is to freeze instead of fight or fly. And if you have that freeze response, then you have, the complete stage fright lockup. I'm not doing anything. And that also can make you feel worse. But that's a very specific example. Generalized anxiety is, I get that feeling and I don't even know why. Like, I'm just sitting here. A lot of people get it when they're driving their car, but it's not in their minds driving related or anything like that. And I'm suddenly unable to do things. I'm having a complete panic attack. I'm sweating. I may feel like I'm having a heart attack. I feel like I'm dying. I can't breathe. I may become physically ill. All these different symptoms happen in anxiety attacks. And some of them are, they're happening without a known cause. And I think just, with self-reflection, we can do some of that too, but it's a lot easier, again, when you seek help and you find some of that from other people. And in many cases, anxiety also has to do with chemical misfirings in your brain. And usually, knock on wood, it's not quite as chronic as depression, and you can go on medication for a while and then get off it, especially if you're processing why the root causes of these things. But it's similar in that sense. That was the longest definition in the world. I'm sorry. Did I mention I lecture people for a living?
I like thorough, so I'm good with that. I'm a context guy.
Sure. Thanks for giving your thoughts, Brandon. John, Hannah, any kind of working definitions that you guys have kind of developed for yourselves, just anxiety and depression?
I'd say, as far as depression goes, I would agree with Brandon. The hopelessness, the lethargy, I think those are really big indicators. Anxiety wasn't something that I really struggled with at all until it bookended my depression, which was really annoying, because growing up, our family went through a lot of difficult things, but we always came out the other side. We always saw God provide. And so I grew up, didn't worry about anything. I was never a worrier. And then when I was in college, I was mowing the lawn and I was like, am I having a heart attack? And it wasn't like, when you said that, I was like, yep, that's exactly what it felt like. And I was like, I'm like 20. Why am I dying right now? I'm just mowing a lawn. It's not that bad. And I realized later on that it was an anxiety attack, a panic attack. And then, the depression set in, and I was dealing with both at the same time. It's awful to be both terrified of the future and also have no energy or desire to do anything about it. It's like this really vicious cycle that just beats you down. And then the depression got a lot better, and the anxiety decided to stick around for a while. And I still have rough days where I deal with anxious thoughts, but I'm in a better place where I know how to process them and not let them take over. And so, yeah, I would agree with really everything Brandon said. And that being someone who never dealt with anxiety, having it really, like I said, bookend the depression that I dealt with in my life was unexpected.
Sure.
I would say for me, just kind of in my experience and people I've worked with, kind of a layman's term, I think there's general worry or stress that we might have over in a specific event. Like, I'm taking a test, I'm doing a job interview, and there might be some things that go with that. And I think many times in different ways we can work through that. For me, I've dealt a lot with anxiety growing up. And so I think the working definition I formed was my anxiety was usually concerned about what might happen in the future. It wasn't guaranteed that'll happen. I just get fixated on, oh, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, and I'm soon locked into that mode. And there's a passage in the Bible, Philippians 4:6-7, that says not to be anxious about anything, but in every situation, prayer and petition and thanksgiving, offer that to God. And when I sit down, I was processing, like, I'm feeling very anxious. Why? And again, when I was processing that, like, I'm super concerned about A, B, C, D that might happen. Again, it's not guaranteed. And so it was very helpful for me to be aware of those situations and me to start processing, okay, why am I worried that A will happen? Okay, if that does, here's what I can do. Why am I worried that B would happen? So for me, that's how kind of anxiety kind of presented itself for me. For depression, I've dealt with that a few times in my life, and I'm also key where, I think I'm being depressed right now. And for me, that's been just ongoing times, and we said this before, of hopelessness, of I don't know how the situation will get better. I don't feel like the situation is ever going to get better. Some of those lies that can kind of play in our head, and my emotions are all over the place. Like, I'll just break down and start crying for no apparent reason. Like, why am I crying? What's going on? It's usually the times when I think I'm starting to key into some of that depression and stuff, and I'm just seeing that show up in some other people as well. Suicidal thoughts can sometimes trigger it, and if someone's stuck in those places for too long. And Brandon, you had something interesting called the SLAP assessment. Do you want to share what that is a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something counselors do all the time, but you don't have to be a counselor to do it. So I feel like it's worth sharing. It's an assessment to figure out if someone close to you is suicidal and how much danger that they're actually in at that moment. So SLAP is an acronym. It stands for finding out how specific, lethal, accessible somebody's suicide methods are and the proximity of resources that they have. So if I can go through them real quick. First of all, a question I often ask is just when someone's like, yes, I want to kill myself, which has happened many times in counseling sessions. Oftentimes that's why somebody comes in, because they want to share that with someone rather than just go do it. In more cases than not, people will share with at least 2 or 3 people that they want to kill themselves before they actually act on it. Not always, but in most situations, people will tell someone. Normally it's a cry for help for them. So they'll come in and they'll say that. So my first question is usually, my first thing is not to overreact to it, because a lot of times that scares them right away. But to ask them, how have you thought about how you're going to do it? And if they say, no, I've never thought about how I'm going to do it, then that's an early stage thought. It's not to say that they're absolutely safe, but they're safer than if they answer, yes, I have this weapon and I'm going to kill myself using it very soon. Then okay, that's a more developed thought. They've considered this, they know their method. So that's the specific part. The lethality part is how dangerous is this method. So if someone says something along the lines of, I have a swimming pool and I'm going to jump in it and drown myself, we have very strong instincts against doing something like that. So that's a less lethal method than someone who said, yes, I have a gun in my car right now, and as soon as I get in my car after this, I'm going to use it to kill myself. That's an extraordinarily lethal method, and a method that our reptilian brain, that deep-seated brain that tells us what to do at a very deep level, doesn't understand. Like, a gun doesn't look like something that's going to kill you to an animal that hasn't seen a gun for very long. And even though humans have been around for a while, we don't fully understand the magnitude of that at an instinctual level, if that makes sense, which makes it more dangerous than trying to breathe in water, which at a very deep instinctual level, we do understand. The pills are somewhere in the middle there as a method that is sometimes lethal, but not as often. Availability is how available is that method. So if someone says, I'm going to shoot myself, the next question is, okay, well, how? That's a very lethal method. It's a very specific method. Do you have a gun? Do you have access to a gun? And if they say, no, I've never shot a gun before, I've never been around a gun, then they have picked a method that is several steps away from them, which means that in their mind, they have decided that's not something they're doing today, most likely, unless they're lying to you about that. But normally people who come in or will otherwise tell you that they're suicidal are telling you the truth. So if they're telling you the truth about that, then they're a few steps away from actually doing it. That method is not very available to them at that moment. And then proximity of resources. So if someone lives alone, if someone is struggling with isolation and living alone, especially in a time like this when many, many people are, that's a red flag. That's a warning. They don't have somebody to turn to. They don't have someone else in their home to help them. If they have someone, on the other hand, if they have a family or they have anyone else who lives with them or is around them, who cares about them, who they're turning to for assistance, willing to talk to about this, that kind of a thing, then they have more resources available. If they're willing to tell that person, yes, this is the method I've thought about, taking all of these sleeping pills we have. And that person says, okay, when we get home, I'm going to get rid of all the sleeping pills. And they're like, okay, then that person has that resource there to, help them. With that in mind, if somebody is claiming that they're suicidal, it is not necessarily our job to, try to be a counselor for them and treat them in general. You can ask these questions. You can also, if you feel like they're imminently suicidal, you can call the police and ask to have them do a Baker Act assessment where that person is asked, are you suicidal? And if that person says yes, or gives any indication that they are, then the police can take them to a holding facility for 48 hours where they can get real treatment, real assessment, get on medication if they need to. And it may sound harsh and it may seem crazy in that moment when that's just your friend talking to you and suddenly they say this stuff. But that can be a life-saving thing to do. And the police are very familiar with it, and they have the easiest job doing it. So don't feel bad about that. If you suspect a friend of yours is even in trouble, you can call the police non-emergency number and ask for what they call a wellness check. We even do this for our students who go to Full Sail sometimes if they're doing things and then they just disappear all of a sudden. And we'll just say, hey, can you send somebody by this address? We're worried about this person. We just need a wellness check. And the police do that all the time too. They'll just pop in, knock on the door, try to check on that person, make sure they're okay. And a surprising number of people, if they're not okay, when somebody shows up to check on them, will admit, yeah, I'm not okay. And again, they can get that help that they need. And sometimes that is the intervention they need to see, like, oh, wow, people cared. People were worried about me. Even though, these are the police showing up at my door, like somebody sent them and cares. And this is someone who cares enough to check. Like maybe I'm not as alone as I feel. So those things can be really helpful for people as well.
I think that right there, especially you can jump right back in, but I just wanted to say, not everyone is going to reach out and not everyone is going to open up to their friends. And so, being able to ask that question or just check on someone and be like, hey, are you doing okay? Sometimes that's all someone needs to open up and start getting help, is for someone to ask, because in their mind, they might think no one cares enough and I don't want to burden them with what I'm going through. I don't want to put like we talked about depression, feeling like this huge weight. I don't want to give that weight to someone else. So I'm not going to tell anyone else. Even though that's one of the best things you can do, but it doesn't process that way. And so having someone that just is there for you and asks those questions, it can be so helpful.
I think that's key. And I want to do a quick pause here because I think, Brendan, you hit on some really good stuff. If anyone is feeling suicidal, I would always encourage, or just feeling bad in general, or just if you feel in a funk and you can't get out of it, reach out for help. Talk to a friend, talk to whoever you can who is a trusted resource that you think will listen to you. If you can't think of anyone, call the suicide prevention hotline. Like we'll give you some resources at the end. This is a serious thing. So if you are ever feeling that place, please do. The second thing is I want to share, if someone sounds like they're in that place. Again, Brandon said this very well. We're not encouraging people to be counselors for them. You oftentimes don't have that tool to make those assessments. And so, again, I strongly encourage you to go and encourage somebody to get help. Go be willing to go with them. And if they're not willing to do that, go and tell someone so that they can check on where it's police or someone you know. Because just working with you for a long time, anytime who threatens suicide, I always tell people take it seriously. Or anyone who says, hey, I'm not doing well, always take it seriously. You don't have to make the assessment of like, is this true or not, blah, blah. That's not your job. Your job is to go and get someone help so that they can see if make sure that they are in a safe place. I think in those moments, we just want to make sure people are healthy and safe. I also do a lot with youth who say, hey, a friend said they might be suicidal, but they told me not to tell anybody. There are certain times where telling secrets is important. If someone says that they're depressed or suicide, by all means, go tell someone. That is the right reason to break a quote unquote confidence or whatever, because their health is at stake. And so I just want to encourage, again, I work with a lot of youth and they're like, a friend told me this, but I promised I wouldn't say anything. No, you're doing the right thing by getting them help, because we're hoping that we can make sure that they're okay in the end. So just want to highlight those two things. For people who might be in a bad place, please go seek help. Or if someone shares with you that they seem to be in a bad place, again, you don't have to have all the tools to evaluate that. You won't. That's not for you. Go find someone to do that. And again, we'll give you some resources at the end of this. So.